Welcome back to part two of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. We continue the conversation with Dr. Lis Conde from the Victoria Academy of Teaching and Leadership. So I can see how evaluative thinking can support all our emotions to move away from grades and just focus on fostering skills and mindsets for students. What other practice-based interventions can educators take into consideration when they are looking at moving away from the focus on the final grade as the test?
It's different for higher education and schools. So in schools, this idea of using purpose as a mechanism um, can be a useful strategy. And let me give you a sort of um, a personal example of my teacher that helped me kind of go beyond the grades and really had an impact in my life. So, n- uh, in high school, I had Miss Dayton as my AP English teacher. Beautiful Miss Dayton. She was really passionate about having really high expectations of us as learners. And so she had really advanced readings, and, the curriculum was definitely fit to be an AP English curriculum. However, uh, she saw the opportunity of going beyond the grades by actually including college entrance aspect to her um, curriculum, right? So the final assessment for that AP English class was this idea that I had to actually create my curriculum, my CV, and I actually had to write my statement of purpose for my college application. And Miss stayed and sat down in there, and I was again using many different things. I was using, I was researching a little bit of what I wanted to do and what subject areas I wanted to go into. I was doing some reflection on my life in order to go write the statement. I was practicing my writing skills, my English abilities, my vocab skills, some of my digital capabilities as well, all together. And I remember Miss Dayton sat down with me and she was like, Lise, because I wasn't reacting well to her feedback. She wanted more, right? I wrote this statement, it wasn't good enough, and she wanted more. And I wasn't reacting well to that. And she, 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 she said, well, Lise, university is possible for you. And here I was back in the day. I was this, brown Hispanic ESL, doing it rough students from the hood. And here was this teacher telling me that university and a better life was possible for me. And not only that, but not only is university possible, but a scholarship is possible for you.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that conversation in itself, like it took me to uh, uh, I did my bachelor degree in Wisconsin on a scholarship. I did my master's degree in Italy on a scholarship. I did my doctorate degree in Australia on a scholarship. All because one teacher thought about how can I go beyond the grade and do something that will actually change this person's lives. And she cared enough to talk to me about it.
Hmm.
So that is that's just yeah, that's for school, right? But the opportunities are expanded once you go into higher education. I mean, you can, you're in corporate world too, and I'm sure that one of the most common ways that people actually provide updates on and reports are through stand-ups, 1 2 minute stand-ups. So how about using a stand-up and a stand-up setup as a way to do formative assessments, formative reports on a project, on a problem, on a case, on how you're doing in your class or what you're thinking about your learning. You've seen that role play activities to get students to use the language, to use the mindsets, and to think about the actions of your subject area, right? Those case study analysis, of course, and probably you've talked a lot about that in your channel. But when it comes to STEM, that idea of not only telling the students how it is, but actually telling your students and then stopping and having your students make informed predictions can also be a way of doing formative assessment. With things like, marketing, with things like, programming, STEM, how about you actually, or law, for example, how about actually you sit down and you set up an activity where your students are actually doing active review sessions, or for things where ethics are are important. That how I've been seeing, and I really like this strategy. I watched the teacher do something called forum theater, and I had never seen it before. But it's about using theater as a way to depict a situation and then stopping and having it's kind of like role playing the situation first, and then stopping and having your students think about what potential solutions would be, and then actually giving your students the opportunity to act out those solutions, right? Again, you're using your mindsets, you're using your language, you're using your technical skills, your transferable skills to all of that. I know that's been a long response, Chooks, but just some different ideas there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I think we could see the impact your own teacher had on your own upbringing and where you're at today. And I want to empathize and let you know that I'm holding space. That happened. But when it comes to teachers, I know we're all in careers where we need to show how successful we are. So for teachers who are going to be applying this incredible sets of practice-based interventions you've provided, what are some examples that would point to a list of success criteria for any teacher who's doing this? How do they know they're successful?
Yeah, so the thing about, again, practice-based interventions are usually used in professional learning because you're working with people who are already practicing, who are already in in some sort of role. Um, but that can also be extended to higher educations and schools, and it does require a little bit of planning. Too, it does. And it's about thinking about what thinking about evidence and forms of evidence can be your data. It can be if you know that your students or your teachers or your team or whatever you are supposed to be doing something, visualizing first what that action needs to look like will give you really concrete success criteria, so that you can actually guide your approach through observable practice, right? If I have a vision of how this assessment, how I would approach this assessment, then I can use that as a comparison and look for cues and data around me and my students, in the reactions in their responses, in the questions, in the language that they're using, to let me know if I'm being successful. So that idea of observable practice. What is the evidence that I'm going to be collecting? Um, how does actual evidence, like in terms of data, look like? Are you just using, how are you going beyond just taking your students' feedback from a survey at the end of your course, in order to inform your practice, right? Are you actively asking your students to give you feedback? And Hattie is huge about that student to teacher feedback as being a really powerful form of feedback there. um, the idea basically, and I couldn't give you a set of success criteria because it's about tracking and monitoring the implementation of whatever you're trying to do, but I could give you a set of success indicators that we used for our leadership courses, for example. And what we were trying to do with this one in particular, just to give you the background, is we were trying to train or help principals know if their school improvement strategies were being successful. So some of the success indicators that we suggested is uh, can I articulate a compelling narrative? Can I talk about it? You know, can my team talk about it? Um, is my team giving me feedback? And is the feedback about the accuracy of my implementation? Is it about the comprehensiveness, the insightfulness, the helpfulness, the innovative aspect of it? Is it useful, right? And how am I responding to that feedback? Um, is my and more importantly, at least in this sense, schools have a strategic plan. So, are you able to articulate the links of what you're trying to do to that plan? Is your team able to articulate, see, and collaborate on those links? Um, so those were some of the success indicators, and I know it has to do with leadership. But um, if there's a one um, final suggestion, is visualize yourself, visualize, try to go about how you will solve uh, the assessment that you are trying to give your student to your students, and actually use that vision as a way to finding the cues that you need and plan it ahead of time, you know?
Well, thank you for those I'll call them signposts. As like you mentioned, it's kind of hard to give a success criteria because different scenarios will be different across the board. Um, well, while we're thinking about this practice-based intervention, is also how to effectively utilize technology to achieve the learning outcomes for which we're setting up this assessment for. How, and I know part of your research was about talking about, if I recall, is um, trying to understand the mindset and the beliefs of educators. And so my question is, what are some strategies to effectively engage educators to utilize technology in implementing this practice-based intervention?
The first thing is about um, thinking about having a very clear um, idea of what the outcome is, right? And using technology with a purpose. So not just using technology for the sole sake of using technology, but using technology because your students as a means to an end, really. And I think COVID had a real impact on um, the awareness of educators about not only the need, the potential of technology, but also how to actually experiment and break that initial sort of uh, resistance that some, not all, there are not a lot of educators out there are doing this, and they're doing this very, very well. But sometimes that you may find a educator that has some sort of resistance to using technology in the classrooms in general, right? And when it comes to practice-based interventions and having that purpose in place, um, it, what I would suggest is actually getting your educator to think about uh, reflective practice. So the idea of evaluative thinking, again, it's about thinking, is what I'm doing working, right? So it is about fostering this habit of being a sort of investigator, or a detective of your own practice. And we can call it a detective, being a detective of your own practice, and hopefully having some fun with it, you know? And so if you think about what kind of technologies detectives use to inspect different crimes and different things, that is the same mindset that you can take in order to investigate your own practice. So, for example, some easy technology. So, if the purpose here is to help students to reflect on their own practice, then if you have that as a purpose, then for example, using wearable technology as a way to actually doing little snapshots, or little voice recordings as to this person is saying this and is using this language. take one, and just collecting that a little bit
Yeah.
using your phone. I mean, everybody has a phone today, taking photos, actually, and actually reacting to that in the same way, like going beyond what we do. Feedback doesn't only have to be like I write here a plus or a minus, a plus one or a plus two in an exam. Feedback can also take different forms, and one of which is using that kind of technology. So if your students are having a choice as to how they're going to investigate their own practice, being writing, being collaborative note taking, being blogging, being video blogs, being just taking pictures and actually creating a gallery out of that, being creating a little bit of a podcast of a day in the life, things like that. You could also use that creativity to respond in the same way. Not that you have to go, outside of what you usually do, but, how about experimenting with some voice recorded feedback? See how that goes, Yeah, hopefully that made a little bit of sense. It's just,
Yes, it
it's
did.
really broad.
It is broad, but I think you pointed on you pointed to a really good angle, which is we know evaluative thinking is all about reflecting and trying to investigate how you did the message you sent across to the students have the impact, and also for the educator taking a back step to see if they can actually prove that what they intended to do, they've done. So, just for us to wrap up, what are some best practices for effective feedback in formative assessment, especially in this scenario of employing evaluative thinking and more practice based intervention?
I just had the opportunity to work with John Hattie on a thought leadership series event, and we're talking about engagement and how, in his mind, and I was really surprised by this. In his mind, um, a method of knowing that your student is engaged is curiosity, and that when and a way to develop that curiosity, one of the ways is having really clear clarity in not only what you're assessing, but in how you're going to assess it. And so, as a number one suggestion is what you're thinking about assessing. So, is your rubric, is your feedback aligned to what you're expecting in performance? A lot of the times we say, for example, let's just think about something common like writing an essay, right? We think that, um, the the idea is about your analysis of a certain concept, and you tell your student that your analysis it is what's going to matter, but yet what you're doing is creating them on grammar. Maybe part of the criterion is, if that is, that's great, but it's just it's just being true and explicit about what you're going to grade, so that that idea of formative assessment, just like going back to the research, it's about you know focusing on the task itself and not on the learner.
Mm.
If because it's about, formative assessments have a real potential to creating confidence in the learner, in creating that sense of curiosity, in creating that sense of ownership. And it's all about, the questions. And this goes back to Hattie. It's like, answering how am I going? That's important, right? Where am I going? Right? But most importantly, where to next? Right? Where to next? So, reduce as much as possible the uncertainty between what you're expecting in performance and your goals.
So I would like to say a big thank you to Dr. Lis Conde today for sharing all this amazing insight. What I've enjoyed most about sharing or learning from you today is that you come with a wealth of experience and you back it up with theory, which is where we want to be going. And I'm sure most educators will appreciate that today. So thank you so much for your time today, and I wish you all the best in your exciting journey with the Victoria Academy of Teaching and Leadership.
Thank you so much for having me, Chooks.